I'd been the family disappointment for 7 years. 7 years since I'd dropped out of law school to pursue design. 7 years since Dad had stopped speaking to me for 3 months. 7 years since Mom had started telling people I was taking a break to find myself, instead of admitting I'd chosen art over a legal career. My brother Cameron was a neurosurgeon. My sister Vanessa ran a hedge fund. And then there was me, Alexis, 32 years old, living in what my parents called that cramped studio in Brooklyn, spending my days on art projects that they assumed barely paid my bills. What they didn't know was that my design firm, Meridian Studios, had grown from a solo freelance operation into a creative powerhouse with 240 employees across 3 offices. We designed brand identities for 18 Fortune 500 companies, created the visual systems for 4 major tech platforms, and last quarter alone had generated $340 million in revenue. But I'd learned early that explaining this to my family was futile. They saw my paint-stained jeans and translated it to poverty. They heard design work and assumed I was making logos on Fiverr for $50. So I'd stopped trying to correct them. Mom's charity gala at the plaza was the kind of event where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks and compare achievements. It was also the kind of event where my mother felt compelled to explain my existence to her socialite friends. I'd arrived in a simple black dress I'd designed myself, my hair pulled back, no designer labels visible. Cameron had arrived in a Tom Ford suit, fresh from a surgery he'd performed that morning on a senator's wife. Vanessa wore Valentino and diamonds from her latest bonus. Alexis. Mom air kissed me, then immediately turned to the couple beside her. This is my youngest. She's creative. The way she said creative made it sound like a diagnosis. The man, who I recognized as the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, smiled politely. What do you do, Alexis? I run a design studio. How nice, his wife said in that tone that meant, how quaint. My niece does graphic design too. She makes birthday cards. I smiled and said nothing. Dinner was a 10-course affair at tables arranged by social hierarchy. My family was seated near the front. Old money, new influence, the kind of positioning Mom had spent decades cultivating. I was placed at their table, though I noticed I had the least prestigious seat, tucked between Cameron's wife and a venture capitalist who spent the entire first course talking around me to Cameron about medical investments. So the surgery took 14 hours, Cameron was saying, his voice carrying across the table. The aneurysm was in one of the most difficult locations possible. But we got it. Patient's prognosis is excellent. That's my boy, Dad said, raising his glass. Saving lives one surgery at a time. Vanessa jumped in. Speaking of victories, we just closed a $4.7 billion acquisition. It'll be announced next week, but we're already seeing positive market movement on the preliminary filings. Mom beamed. I don't understand all the details, but I tell everyone my daughter is brilliant with money. Then her eyes landed on me and I watched the brightness dim slightly. And Alexis is doing, well, she's keeping busy with her art. She's still doing her little art projects, Mom continued, turning to the guests at our table. A real estate developer and his wife, the pharmaceutical CEO and his wife, and a retired judge. She has such a good eye for color. The real estate developer's wife smiled kindly. That's wonderful. Do you sell your work? I run a design firm, I said again. We work with corporate clients. Oh, like making their websites pretty? She seemed genuinely interested in the way someone might be interested in a child's lemonade stand. Something like that. Can't even afford rent, Dad added, and I felt my face flush despite myself. She lives in this tiny studio in Brooklyn. We've offered to help, but she's stubborn. I can afford my rent just fine, Dad. That's what you say, but we know how expensive the city is. And art doesn't exactly pay the bills. Cameron's wife, Jessica, leaned over. Have you thought about teaching? My friend teaches art at a private school in Westchester. The pay is decent and you'd have summers off. I'm happy with what I'm doing. But surely you want stability? Benefits? A retirement plan? I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. The Wall Street Journal's morning edition would publish online at midnight. 3 hours and 13 minutes from now. I have all of those things. Vanessa laughed, not unkindly. Alexis, come on. We're family. You don't have to pretend. If you need help, we can help. I could get you an administrative position at my firm. It wouldn't be glamorous, but it's steady income. I don't need help. Pride is expensive, Dad said, cutting into his beef Wellington. Your mother and I didn't raise you to struggle. There's no shame in accepting that the art thing didn't work out and moving on to something more practical. The venture capitalist finally turned his attention to me. What kind of art do you do? I don't do art. I run a design and branding firm. Oh. His interest sparked. Which firm? Meridian Studios. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Meridian Studios in Dumbo? That's the one. He set down his fork completely. You run Meridian? As in you're Alexis Chin? Yes. The table had gone quiet. I know Meridian, he said slowly. We tried to book your team for a rebrand last year. We couldn't get on your schedule. You were booked solid for 18 months. Mom's smile had frozen on her face. I'm sure you're thinking of a different company, Harold. No, I'm not. Meridian Studios. You did the rebrand for Nexus Technology. And that campaign for Altitude Finance that won every design award that year. Your work is featured in the MoMA's permanent collection. MoMA. Dad's voice came out strangled. The pharmaceutical CEO leaned forward. Wait, Meridian did our rebrand 3 years ago. Cost us $8 million, but it was worth every penny. Our brand recognition increased by 340%. I took a sip of water. That was a good project. Your team was very collaborative. You charged us $8 million? He sounded more impressed than upset. Our rate was lower then. That same project would cost closer to $14 million today. Mom's hand had gone to her throat. Alexis, what are you talking about? I'm talking about my company, Mom. Meridian Studios. We employ 240 people. We have offices in New York, Los Angeles, and London. Last year our revenue was $890 million. The retired judge choked on his wine. $890 million? Vanessa whispered. Dollars. Yes. Cameron had gone pale. That's not possible. You live in a studio apartment. I live in a 4,000 square foot loft in Dumbo that I bought for $7.2 million. It's registered under an LLC for privacy. The studio you're thinking of is my personal workshop. I keep it because I like having a separate creative space. Dad was shaking his head. No, we would have known. We would have seen. Seen what, Dad? You never asked about my work. You never visited my office. You never looked at my portfolio or my client list. You decided 7 years ago that I'd failed and nothing I said could change your mind, so I stopped trying to convince you. The venture capitalist was typing on his phone. Jesus Christ. Forbes estimates your company's valuation at $1.2 billion. They project you'll hit unicorn status by next quarter. We're already there, I said quietly. The valuation they're using is from last year. Current estimates are closer to $1.8 billion. Vanessa's face had gone completely white. You're a billionaire? On paper. Most of that is tied up in the company. Liquid assets are closer to $200 million. Closer to $200 million, Mom repeated faintly. The real estate developer was laughing, a disbelieving sound. This is extraordinary. I thought I was sitting next to a struggling artist. Instead, I'm sitting next to one of the most successful entrepreneurs in New York. You were treating me like a struggling artist, I corrected. There's a difference. My phone lit up with a notification. Around the table, several other phones buzzed simultaneously. The pharmaceutical CEO pulled out his phone and his jaw dropped. The Wall Street Journal just posted their morning feature early. The billion-dollar designer, how Alexis Chin built an empire while her family thought she was broke. The blood drained from Mom's face. They interviewed me 3 weeks ago, I said calmly. They wanted to do a piece on young founders who've achieved success outside traditional paths. I told them about my family's assumptions. About dropping out of law school. About the 7 years of being introduced as the disappointment. Dad grabbed his phone with shaking hands. I watched his eyes move across the screen, getting wider with each paragraph. They have quotes from your clients, he whispered. The CEO of Nexus Technology says you're the best strategic designer of your generation. The CMO of Altitude Finance calls you a visionary. There are photos of your offices. They're massive. The London office is smaller. Only 60 people. Cameron was reading over Dad's shoulder. They estimate your personal net worth at $400 million. They list you as one of the 50 most influential designers alive. The net worth is high. I'd put it closer to $350 million, and that's including property and equity. The table had erupted in whispers. People from neighboring tables were pulling out their phones following the notification. I could see the moment the recognition spread through the room. Heads turning, people pointing, whispers growing louder. Mom's friend from the next table rushed over. "Patricia, did you see? Your daughter is in the Wall Street Journal. They're calling her a genius." Mom couldn't speak. She just stared at me like she'd never seen me before. The pharmaceutical CEO stood and extended his hand formally. "Miss Chin, I apologize for my earlier dismissiveness. It's an honor to have worked with Meridian. Your team's work quite literally transformed our company." "Thank you. Your team made it possible." The venture capitalist stood as well. "I'm going to email you tomorrow. We should discuss investment opportunities. Meridian is exactly the kind of company our fund looks for. We're not seeking outside investment, but I appreciate the interest." He sat back down looking impressed. "Smart. Maintain control. I respect that." Dad was still scrolling through the article, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been grief. "They interviewed us. The reporters called last month asking about you. We told them. Oh God, we told them you were still figuring out your path." "The quote is on page 2, I said. "Your exact words were, Alexis is taking her time finding something that fits. We support her creative exploration, even if we wish she'd chosen something more stable." Vanessa had tears in her eyes. "All those times I offered you jobs. Administrative positions. Entry-level roles. And you're running $1 billion company." "Yes. Why didn't you tell us?" "I did tell you. Dozens of times. You didn't listen." Cameron's voice was hoarse. "The article says you've been supporting several art programs in underprivileged schools. You donated $15 million to the Brooklyn Museum. You funded an entire wing at Pratt Institute. Art education is important. I wanted to give opportunities to kids who might not otherwise have them." $15 million, he repeated. "I make good money as a neurosurgeon, but I couldn't write a check for $15 million. You save lives, Cameron. That's worth more than any check I could write." Mom finally found her voice. "But the way you dress. The way you live. You don't look wealthy." "What does wealth look like, Mom? Designer labels? Expensive cars? I have those things. I have a Porsche in my garage that I drive maybe twice a month. I have custom suits from Savile Row. But I prefer jeans and t-shirts because I'm usually working with my hands. I prefer being comfortable over being impressive." The retired judge was still reading the article on his phone. "They quote several of your employees. All of them describe you as a generous employer, paying well above industry standard, offering full benefits and profit sharing. One designer says you paid off her student loans as a retention bonus. Good employees are hard to find. I believe in compensating fairly." More phones were buzzing. The article was spreading through social media, being shared and reshared. I watched the realization dawn across the room. The struggling artist was actually a mogul. A photographer approached our table. "Miss Chin? I'm from the Times. May I get a photo for tomorrow's business section?" "I'd prefer not to, but thank you." He nodded respectfully and left. No argument, no pressure. That was new, the courtesy that came with revealed wealth. Dad set down his phone with trembling hands. Why let us think you were failing?" "I didn't let you think anything, Dad. You made assumptions. I told you I had clients. I told you I'd hired employees. I told you I'd won awards. You smiled and changed the subject because it didn't fit your narrative of what success should look like. We were worried about you. You were embarrassed by me. There's a difference." Vanessa stood abruptly. "I need air." She walked away from the table and I could see her shoulders shaking. Jessica, Cameron's wife, leaned over. "The teaching job I mentioned. I'm so sorry. That was incredibly condescending." "It's fine. You didn't know. But I should have asked. I should have been curious instead of assuming." Mom's phone was ringing continuously. She ignored it. "Everyone's calling. Everyone's seen the article. What do I tell them? Tell them the truth. Tell them your daughter runs a successful company. Tell them you're proud of her. Or don't. I don't actually care what you tell them. The coldness in my voice surprised even me. The gala's host, Mom's co-chair for the charity, approached the table. Patricia, I had no idea Alexis was so accomplished. We must get her on the committee. Someone with her business acumen would be invaluable. I'm not interested in committee work, I said before Mom could respond. But I'm happy to make a donation to the cause. Oh, that's generous, but it's really the networking and visibility that. I'll donate $2 million tonight. You can announce it from the stage if you'd like. She gaped at me. $2 million? The work you're doing with arts education is important. Consider it seed funding for next year's program expansion. She actually curtsied before walking away. Mom looked like she might be sick. You can just write a check for $2 million? I can write a check for considerably more than that if necessary. But $2 million felt appropriate for tonight. Cameron returned to the table having composed himself. I looked up your company's client list. You've worked with 37 Fortune 500 companies. You designed the interface for Horizon, the app that 3 billion people use. 3 billion, Alexis. It was a good project. Challenging scope, but the team pulled it together. The team you built, he said. The company you created. The empire you grew from nothing while we all thought you were struggling. Dad's voice came out broken. At Thanksgiving, I told Uncle Richard you were still freelancing. I said it apologetically, like I was confessing a failure. Uncle Richard's son is a mid-level manager at a regional bank, and I was embarrassed that you weren't doing as well as he was. Uncle Richard's son makes $90,000 a year, I said. I'm happy for him, that's a solid living. But yes, Dad, I'm aware you've been positioning me as the family failure. The article says you're one of the youngest self-made entrepreneurs to hit the billion-dollar mark. They compare you to Steve Jobs and Sarah Blakely. Journalists like comparisons. It makes for better headlines. Vanessa returned, her makeup repaired but her eyes still red. I tried to get you an admin job. An admin job. At my firm. Where I manage other people's billions. And you're worth more than most of my clients. Your offer came from a place of care. I understand that. Do you really? Because I think you must hate us. I don't hate you, Vanessa. I'm just tired. Tired of defending my choices. Tired of being the cautionary tale at family dinners. Tired of being introduced as the one who chose creativity over stability, like it was a character flaw. The venture capitalist cleared his throat. Miss Chin, I have to ask, what's your end game? Most founders your age are looking for acquisition opportunities, exit strategies. But the article suggests you're committed to staying independent. Meridian isn't for sale. We have complete creative control, we choose our clients and we build things we're proud of. Money is wonderful. It provides security and freedom. But the work itself, the ability to create without compromise, that's irreplaceable. He nodded slowly. That's principled. Rare but principled. Mom's phone rang again. This time she answered it. Hello? She's here. No, I don't have a comment. Please stop calling. She ended the call and looked at me with something like desperation. The press wants statements. About you, about the family, about why we never mentioned your success. Tell them the truth. You didn't mention it because you didn't know about it. But we should have known. We're your parents. Yes, I said simply. You should have. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Dad was reading another article that had just posted. Forbes just put out a reaction piece. They're calling tonight the most dramatic reveal of the year. They're comparing it to that time the Walmart heir showed up to shareholder meetings in a pickup truck. I didn't plan the timing, I said. The Wall Street Journal chose their publication schedule. The fact that it coincided with Mom's gala was coincidental. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I'd known the article would publish tonight. I'd known it would create a scene. Maybe part of me had wanted this. The public validation, the undeniable proof, the moment when everything they'd assumed was proven wrong. Cameron was pulling up more search results. There are already 50 articles about you. Business Insider, TechCrunch, Fast Company. They're all running stories. The designer who built a billion-dollar empire in secret. Why Alexis Chen's family had no idea she was wealthy. The stealth billionaire. I wasn't exactly stealthy. I just wasn't loud. Jessica spoke up quietly. The article mentions you bought your parents' mortgage 3 years ago when they were facing foreclosure. You paid it off completely and never told them. Mom's head snapped up. What? The house in Scarsdale, I said. You were underwater after the market crash, facing foreclosure. I bought the note from the bank and forgave the debt. The house is yours free and clear. I had my lawyers structure it so you'd never know. Dad's face crumbled. That's why the foreclosure notice disappeared. We thought the bank had made an error. We thought we'd gotten lucky with a modification. You did get lucky. You just didn't know I was the reason. How much was it? Mom whispered. $1.4 million. It was nothing, Mom. I just closed a deal worth $80 million. Paying off your house was a rounding error. A rounding error, she repeated, her voice rising. Our entire mortgage was a rounding error to you and you didn't tell us? What would I have said? By the way, I just paid off your house with the pocket change from my design empire that you don't believe exists. You would have refused. You would have been insulted. So I did it quietly and let you think you'd gotten lucky. Vanessa was crying openly now. We don't deserve you. Maybe not. But you're my family and I love you anyway. The gala host returned to the stage to make announcements. But before she could begin, someone in the crowd shouted, "Tell us about Alexis Chin." Others joined in. Speech. We want to hear from Alexis. Mom looked at me with panic. They want you to speak. I'm not here to make a speech. But the crowd was insistent, applause building until the host returned to our table. Miss Chin, would you mind saying a few words? Everyone's very excited about the news. I'm really not prepared. Please, Mom said quietly. Please, Alexis. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in 7 years. Respect. Uncertainty. But underneath it all, genuine curiosity about who I actually was. I stood slowly and walked to the stage, very aware that everyone in the room was watching me with new eyes. The host handed me the microphone. I looked out at hundreds of faces, Manhattan's elite, people who'd dismissed me an hour ago and now hung on my every word. I didn't expect to speak tonight, I began. But since you're all curious, I'll keep this brief. 7 years ago, I dropped out of law school to pursue design. Everyone told me I was making a mistake. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer. My professors said I was throwing away a guaranteed career. My friends worried I'd end up broke and struggling. The room was completely silent. And for 7 years, most people, including my own family, assumed I had failed. They saw my paint-stained clothes and assumed poverty. They heard designer and thought starving artist. They made assumptions based on their own limited definitions of success. I paused, letting that sink in. Here's what I learned. Other people's assumptions about your life have no bearing on your actual life. Their doubts don't diminish your achievements. Their lack of vision doesn't limit your potential. Success doesn't require an audience. It just requires commitment, hard work, and the courage to pursue something you believe in even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. Applause started to build, but I raised my hand to stop it. But I also learned something painful. When you let people believe the wrong story about you for too long, eventually they'll be shocked by the truth. My family had no idea about my success because I stopped trying to convince them. I let them think what they wanted to think. That was my choice and it had consequences. I looked directly at my parents. So tonight, if there's anything I want people to take away, it's this. Ask questions. Be curious about the people you love. Don't assume you know their story just because you've decided what their story should be. Success comes in many forms, and some of the most impressive achievements happen quietly without fanfare or permission. The applause this time was thunderous. As I walked back to my seat, people reached out to touch my arm, to congratulate me, to introduce themselves. The photographer I'd turned away earlier caught my eye and raised his camera in a question. This time I nodded. When I sat down, Dad was crying openly. I'm so sorry, Alexis. I'm so incredibly sorry. I know. Can we start over? Can we learn who you actually are? That depends. Do you want to know who I am, or do you want to know the billionaire the Wall Street Journal wrote about? Because those are different things. He wiped his eyes. I want to know my daughter. The real one. Not the version I invented in my head. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Will you have dinner with us? Just us, no guests, no pressure. Will you tell us about your work? About your life? About everything we've missed? Yes. I'd like that. Vanessa leaned over. And maybe you could tour us through your office? Show us what you do. I can arrange that. Cameron smiled, a genuine smile without the competitive edge I'd gotten used to. I want to hear everything. And I want to apologize for every time I implied your work wasn't real. Apology accepted. My phone was buzzing continuously now. Messages from employees, clients, friends who'd seen the news. Media requests were flooding in. My head of PR had sent me 17 texts in the last 10 minutes, all in capital letters. But I silenced my phone and turned my attention back to my family. They looked different now. Smaller somehow, like they'd been operating with a false sense of scale and had finally seen the actual dimensions of the world I'd built. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. People approached our table all night wanting to talk about my work, to pitch ideas, to network. My parents watched in amazement as CEOs and venture capitalists treated me like a peer, like someone whose time was valuable, whose opinion mattered. At the end of the night, as we walked out of the plaza, Dad pulled me aside. The article mentioned you have 3 board seats at major companies, that you advise startups, that you mentor young designers, that you've created a foundation that funds art programs in 50 cities. Yes. All while we thought you were barely getting by. Yes. That must have been lonely. The observation surprised me with its accuracy. Sometimes. But I had my team. My clients. People who understood what I was building. But not your family. No. Not my family. He looked up at the night sky, stars barely visible through Manhattan's light pollution. I'll never forgive myself for missing this. For missing you. You don't have to carry that forever, Dad. We have time now. We can build something new. The article said you named the company Meridian because it means the highest point and a line that runs true. I never asked you why you chose that name. Because I wanted to build something that reached for the highest point of creativity while staying true to my vision. Everything I do comes back to that principle. He nodded slowly. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful, Alexis. My car pulled up. A black Tesla that I'd ordered through an app. Not the Porsche which was still in my garage. Not a flashy statement. Just quiet, efficient transportation. Can I drop you somewhere? I asked. Dad shook his head. Your mother and I are going to walk for a while. I think we need to talk. To process all this. Okay. He hugged me then, longer than he had in years. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I should have said that every day and I'm sorry I didn't. But I'm saying it now. I'm so incredibly proud of you. Thank you, Dad. I climbed into the car and watched through the window as my parents stood together on the sidewalk, having what looked like an intense conversation. Cameron and Vanessa were nearby, both on their phones, probably fielding calls about me. As the car pulled away, I checked my messages. My head of PR's latest text read, "This is the biggest press day we've ever had. Your profile has increased 4,000%. We need to schedule a media strategy meeting ASAP." I typed back, "Tomorrow. Tonight I just want to go home. Home to my loft in Dumbo. Home to my workshop where I still spent hours every week designing by hand, creating the work that had started all of this. Home to the life I'd built while everyone thought I was failing." The validation felt good. The revelation had been satisfying. But the real victory had happened 7 years ago, when I'd walked away from law school and chosen to build something meaningful on my own terms. Everything after that, the clients, the revenue, the billion-dollar valuation, was just proof that I'd been right all along. My phone lit up one more time. A text from Mom. "Thank you for paying off our house. Thank you for never giving up on your dreams. Thank you for being you even when we couldn't see it. I love you so much." I typed back, "I love you too, Mom. See you for dinner next week. I'll tell you everything." And this time I knew she'd actually listen.